Hey everyone, it's Peter Barron. Thanks for joining me today for today's episode of the Moonshot podcast. I'm really excited to be with my friend Clayton Johnston. Clayton is the director of admission at Brentwood College School, which I think as the crow flies is maybe 50 miles from me here from Seattle up to Victoria, beautiful Victoria. It's gorgeous up there. So Clayton, you and I have known each other for a long time. I mean, I'm thinking about my work with Western boarding schools. That's been like 15 years ago, at least.
Oh, at least, yeah.
Yeah. And you're just such a wise voice in the space of boarding schools and boarding school admission. And, I saw the other day that you just published a new book called Dare to Be Different. And I thought, oh my gosh, we got to bring Clayton on because I think that you've got some really important lessons to share in a book that hopefully a lot of people will pick up along the way. But first off, Clayton, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to see you again. You're a little grayer than when I first met you, I think. But
grayer and less hair, for sure.
I can speak to that, too. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Hey, so obviously you and I know each other, but for those folks who don't, can you tell us a little about yourself and as well as the book? Like, what brought you there?
Sure. I've been in education almost 40 years. After university, I went down to the Bahamas for 6 years to teach and met my wife there and realized after 6 years that I probably didn't want to raise a family in a little island in the middle of nowhere. So looked around and knew I wanted to come to Western Canada and found this place. And I've been at Brentwood for 30 years. I've been in house parenting here. I've taught, I've coached, I've been director of campus life. And in 2006, they kind of threw me into admissions. We're a school of about 535, 40 kids, depending on the year. 80% of our school's boarding, so it's a huge percentage of boarding. So we really define ourselves as a boarding school. And Dare to Be Different was written just kind of in a reflective mode because I wish I'd had something similar when I started. I really had no mentor. I was, as I said, thrown into this job, didn't know what I was doing. And so it's just some salient points that I think might be helpful for newbies. And it might also be helpful for leaders of schools to see what it's like to be in admissions and what they're feeling.
Yeah, especially since, for most schools, enrollment is the largest revenue source that funds operating. You talk a lot about like stepping away from like that traditional approach to enrollment. And I'm curious, like what can you share can you define what that means and maybe share some examples?
Sure. I mean, first off, every school has their own way of doing things. I have by no means the only way to do things. Out of necessity and out of being completely ignorant about the job, I jumped into this world knowing nothing about the vernacular used or how to do it. So I kind of blindly followed what others were doing. And those typically were a lot of junkets and fairs and traveling en masse in groups to different parts of the world to try to find students. And it was significant money that we were spending doing that. And I know I'm not going to be popular with a lot of my peers by saying this, but I found that they weren't as useful as they probably could be. And could that money be used in a different way to be more targeted and to create more diversity? So we have an 80-20 model here at Brentwood. 80% of our kids are typically North American. We have close to 50 American kids at our school as well. And 20% are international. I want all of our North American kids to have a really diverse international experience. So we're from almost 52 countries, I think, around the world. And I want our international kids to have a North American experience. Like, why fly all the way here if you're going to have a Turkish one or a Korean one or whatever? So that's kind of the model. And I knew that by fulfilling this model, I needed to be on the road a lot and be very targeted about opening up new markets. So it was kind of different from what other people were doing. And, the cover of Dare to Be Different is this one guy walking in one direction. Because in my mind, whenever I saw these junkets and fairs eventually going to a certain part of the world, I wanted to be somewhere else where it was quiet and I had time to meet people with consultants to share ideas for them to get to know us and develop a relationship of trust. And it seemed to really work for us. So that's kind of where we went.
How did you identify the markets? I'm curious.
Well, 30 years ago, Twitter was a year or two old, maybe. There was no Instagram. Facebook was relatively new. The internet was new. I knew that we had done a very poor job of marketing. Everybody went around the world knew all the rival schools. They didn't know who we were. So I knew I had to find a way to have them learn about us. So I spent an exorbitant amount of time on social media and learning how to meta tag and, getting on not podcasts back then, but blogging and connecting our website with the outside world. I wanted to drive our school up any kind of search platform. So most of my time was just spent in front of a computer for a few years, actually. And that was the key thing for us, that it was using that platform and then digging in from there. So if I saw, a expat Canadian group in Dubai the mothers would meet every Wednesday for coffee, I would invite myself and go chat with them. If there was a radio station I walked by, I'd knock on the door and said, I got a great idea for it. Why the heck would anybody send their kid to a boarding school? Let's have a conversation. TV stations, things like that. So it was just kind of out of the box, random stuff. But it seemed to resonate. There's an authenticity about it and a personalization of it. So it seemed to work.
And do you still do that today, or do you have to? Are there different?
Yeah. Anytime I'm on an airplane or an airport, I'm on Twitter saying, "Hey." In fact, in Seattle, I did a presentation and I tweeted out to the radio stations and Seattle Times, I'm going to be there if you're interested. And one year, the education person writing about education for the Times came out.
Really?
Saw the presentation. She came up here and spent the whole day on our campus and gave us a full-page article, education sentence.
All right. I just want to I want to make sure we're getting what you're saying here, because there's a lot of simplicity to it, but there's also a lot of commitment that has to be made, right? So you embraced an inbound marketing strategy, a social strategy to, one, demonstrate your expertise in markets that maybe don't know you, and two, connect you with people who otherwise you just wouldn't be connected with. And so you're literally landing in cities and then tagging local media and other influencers in those markets to be like, hey, I'm here, let's have a conversation. My guess is it doesn't work every single time, but when it does work, is it fair to say that it's got big impact? How would you rate that?
Yeah, I think most of the time it does not work. Absolutely. I mean,
right.
Who wants to,
right.
It's like I'm selling something that nobody really wants in any city. Like you land in Kazakhstan and who wants to go to Canada for boarding school? But when it does work, it has a huge impact. You're right, because there are people who want to learn and want to know more. I mean, I knock on language school doors. I'll walk down the street and say, English language lessons. So I'll knock on them, and if they're having a session, I'll sit in there and chat with them. And you never know where that will land. And things like LinkedIn, of course. I mean, that's huge. I can't count the amount of kids that have come to our school through connections I've made through LinkedIn with either consultants or organizations and things like that.
Sounds like there's just a lot of hustle, right? I mean, it feels like a lot of commitment. Yeah.
It is, and we're only 3 in our department for, there's me, my associate, and my assistant who handles the database. So it is very time-consuming. It's all-encompassing. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't want to do it. I get a real rush out of it. I have such passion for this school that I'm just happy to share it at any time, whether it's in an elevator or it's wherever.
Yeah. I mean, that must be the key, right? It's the passion.
People don't buy facilities. They don't buy anything. They buy passion. If they can see a person who is so invested and believes so strongly in their product, it goes a long way.
How do you talk about your product?
So, I joke to everybody I meet that, every brochure prospectus of every school looks the same. Everybody's smiling. It never rains. It's great community, all that stuff. So what I do is I create what's called differentiators. So I even put it in our brochure. I don't know if you can see it, but I have 11 differentiators that I clearly articulate that makes us different to most schools in the world. One is obviously we're right on the Pacific Ocean. Well, not many people can do that, even if they'd like to. So what does that allow us to do? What things can our students do because we're on the ocean? We have scuba diving as a sport right off our docks. We have marine biology, oceanography, things like that. So establishing differentiators. So if you have a equestrian program, how is your equestrian program different than anybody else's? If you're a single-sex school, how's that different? If you have grade-specific trips that you do every year, how's that different than the other schools that are doing it? So really being able to articulate those differentiators and focusing on them. So my brochure and my presentation that I do when I travel is just those differentiators.
Mm. And do you follow, like, are you segmenting applicants based on the differentiators that they're most attracted to?
Not at all. Our school offers so much that I really think there's something for everybody here.
Yeah. Oh, I do want to bring it back to the book for just a second here, because you earlier on in the interview, you had mentioned that not only is this a guide for, admission folks, but it's also one for school leaders. And, that is really important to me, because enrollment is one of the business competencies at Moonshot OS. It's something that I think every leader at an independent school has to develop skills in. Like, can you talk about that and like how the book can help in that regard?
Yeah, I talk a bit about it in the book as well, about, advice to heads of schools in particular. A lot of heads and boards, without meaning to, can get in the way and become too involved. I have so many peer friends that I've met around the world that are spending their evenings writing up weekly board reports or reporting to the head. And there's this anxiety that they're not doing enough. And my advice is, look, you either trust your admissions team or you don't. And if you do, let them fly. I have an amazing team here at Brentwood. We have a distributed leadership model. So everybody's kind of, here's your job, do it, and see you later. I don't even know where you are in the world. I don't care. Clayton, you do your job. I only have 2 criteria. Fill the school with mission-appropriate students and stay under budget. I don't care if you stay in a 5-star hotel or a tent. Stay under budget, fill the school, I'll stay out of what's left of my hair. That is such an empowering thing for admissions teams, because it allows them to be creative and not be always looking over their shoulder. And so that kind of approach to admissions by my school has allowed me to be creative. And sure, I'm going to fall and scrape my knees, and sure, I'm going to fail in certain markets. And I do that a lot. But I'm given the chance to do it without feeling that I'm going to be judged by it.
So there's a tolerance for you to try new things. Like there's
Absolutely.
Your school's conditioned for that?
It is now, after all this time. And I think the proof's in the pudding. When people walk on our campus, they see it's a very different school in many ways.
How can you build that I don't know if tolerance isn't the right word, but like, how do you, if you're an enrollment director, admission director, and you're thinking, I vibe with what you're saying, Clayton, like I want to be in that position, and maybe I'm not there yet. Like, how do you create that culture so that you can get to that place?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think, I have the advantage of time, and it wasn't always like this when I was first starting off. I was just trying to keep my head above water. But, maybe get the book and give it to your head, because I talk about that. I'm asking heads to back off and trust them and let them be creative, and don't be so demanding and about, I want reports and I want all this stuff. Are you filling the school and staying under budget?
Yeah, because the results ultimately are going to show themselves very, very clearly. You talk about 12 rules of thumb. Like, break that down for me.
So I kind of was sifting through the main points that I feel have made a real difference for us. And as I said early on, I really didn't know what I was doing in admissions, but gradually I began to see that maybe the way that the traditional ways weren't what was going to be best for us. So Out with the Old is one of my chapters. Don't get bogged down with admissions funnels and ROI and marketing analysis and projections and pivot-ready strategies and metrics and acceptance rates and all this stuff. Fill the school. And if you can do it and you know how to do it, don't get bogged down with that. The Board of Governors, that's what we call it in Canada, ultimately, that's all they want. They want to know you're on track and that you can do it. And, again, I've had a lot of years to prove that I can do it most times. So I focus on key indicators for me. How am I doing my job? So I set enrollment targets every year based on kind of the information I have. Attrition rates I track really closely. So not only the rate, but when they leave, where they came from, what grade they're in, how many years have they been at Brentwood, what house are they in, who's their advisor, and you can track that information, and that informs me to to see if I'm doing the right job. Or 60% of the kids leaving after their first year or early on in their first year. So what can we do as a team here to ensure that we're embracing them in a better way? Or is it a certain house that's causing the issue? I can inform my team of that too. So I think that's really important. Budget maintenance, as I said, I have the same budget I use today that I did since 2006. So as we talked earlier, I spent a lot of time on the internet, and that's free. My time isn't free, but it's a lot of the legwork can be done that way instead of jumping on an airplane. I track academic averages. That informs me if I'm doing my job by grade annually. So if I can see an overall swing in the downward direction, I know that maybe I'm not bringing in the mission appropriate kids that I thought I had. University placement. Is it tougher to get the kids I'm bringing in out? Is that the market, or is it the kind of kids I'm bringing in? So I spent a lot of time with our university college counseling team to talk about that. And then every year our school does, in June, we do an anonymous survey for parents and students. And it talks about, facilities, programs, arts, sports, boarding houses. And that gives us a really good feedback if the school I'm promising is the one that they're actually experiencing. And luckily, it's unbelievably high every year. So that really informs me. So all these things inform me about the kinds of kids I'm bringing in. And it seems to work. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, it does. And just to be clear, like, you're not saying don't track data. That's not what you're saying. What you're saying is there are other data points that can be informative and help you do your job really well. I'm super curious about the attrition component. Like, you're tracking that's a lot of data to compile, I would imagine. How do you
track it? So every year I have an attrition list, and in it I also have mid-year entries, so I can see who's going out, who's coming in. I track it as it goes along. I track bubblers, I call them, kids who are kind of house parents inform me weekly if there's anybody in their house homesick or whatever, and discipline. And then 1-year students as well, like from Germany or Mexico. And so NACE, the National Association of Independent Schools, has an attrition rate calculator that I use every year. So I just plug in that data because it's set up for that, and it'll give me the percentage. And every year we have less than half the national average for a similar size school in North America. So I know we're on track. If it starts to go up, okay, what's going on here?
Do you have a committee? Like, are you doing this yourself, or are there other stakeholders around the school?
No, myself.
Yourself. How do you then kind of push this data out to other folks?
So I give it for the annual board report. I offer it to the head of school, and they kind of present that. There's a series of things, ROIs that they want, how many inquiries, how many applications, how many interviews, and blah, 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 that I give him. And those are pretty easy to track. So.
The strategies inside of the data, from a retention point of view, like, it sounds like your numbers are really strong, but there must be strategies involved to make sure they're strong. Like, what are some of the things that you recommend schools look at?
Okay, this would be more for maybe a head of school, but when I took over this job, there was a very popular admissions person who ended up taking a headship somewhere. And his mantra was always retention, retention, retention. If you don't lose them, you don't have to replace them.
It's cheaper than finding a new kid, right?
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
He would spend his time, his wife would bake cookies for kids that were struggling, and, he'd be out and all amongst them. And he was wonderful. Everybody loved him until I really thought about it. The school I'm selling is a caring community. I have a group of people here that are amazing they're the pros of retention. I cannot be spending my time worried about retention. My job, there's only a few outward-facing people in a school, right? Your advancement team, your admissions team, maybe your head of school. I have to let the world know we exist. All of my energy needs to be out there, letting people know we're here. If I spend time putting cookies on beds and hanging out, or doing duty in the houses and advising, I can't do that job. So a great many schools, I think, have an admissions team that is fully involved in the day-to-day, which is great, but is it the best use of your admissions team time? We're lean and mean, as I said. There's only 3 of us, and I have to spend every waking hour trying to find students for our school and diversifying our school.
So does that mean then the head of school, it's incumbent upon the head of school, at least in your opinion, to set the expectation that maybe they're not talking about it specifically, like, hey, faculty, staff, this is our retention strategy. But like, are there signals coming from ahead that says that this is important?
Yeah, and I do an opening year presentation for all staff, faculty and staff, which is awesome because, the kitchen staff and the laundry staff and the maintenance staff, they're all part of the retention of our school, right? They make the kids happy and wanting to be here. And at that presentation, and they kind of wait for it annually, I flash on our attrition rate, and they understand what it means now. And I explain to them that it's because of them that this is so good, and they'll see if it sneaks up a little bit. And so there's a buy-in at the front end.
That's great.
It's internal marketing in a sense, right? You're getting everybody to buy in, to be wanting to be a part of this retention. And then my last slide is a train track that goes this way and this way. And there's, 24, 25, and there's 23, 24, whatever. So that school continues. I'm always living in the next year.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to pivot and live in this world in this year, which is sad, but it's also exciting because I'm like the manager of a baseball team creating this new team every year, and all my energy and focus has to be there. Now, if I had a team of 10 people, Peter, I could hang around and I could do other things, but to be lean and mean, if that's your model, then it's hard.
When you talk about future-proofing schools, like what do you mean by that?
Well, one of the things is, I took over 2006, and you know what happened in 2008. We were suddenly seen as a luxury item, right? Schools were panicking. How are we going to fill our beds? And a lot of them ended up going to China because that's where the market was, and well, not so much now, but was really, really strong. And people were filling their schools, and it was scary for me. But then I kind of, because I was naive, I kind of sat down and I go, well, if I don't go to one market to fill my school, and I can fill the school by diversifying, it's like diversifying your portfolio, right? We're going to future-proof our school because we're not reliant on one market. Because once you open up, 3,000 people coming in from one market, if that market crashes, your school is in trouble. And we've seen that with Japan, we've seen it with Korea. We're now seeing an economy that's slowing in China.
Well, not only an economy that's slowing in China, but a massive investment in on-the-ground international schools in that market, with less expensive options.
Good point. I hadn't thought about that part. So diversifying became my mantra. So I actually put in the brochure the amount of kids from each country, because I knew in the past a lot of schools couldn't do that as effectively because it's really goes 3 from here, 4 from China, and you can see the diversity. It takes a lot of work and a lot of travel to open up new markets, but the payoff, I believe, future-proofs your school. Because if markets are fluctuating, political climates change, we feel we're pretty stable. And I've never been to China, and I feel that I still have that in my back pocket. I could go there if it's needed. I'd love to go because it's amazing. But there you are. That's one reason.
So if you're a school that has transition in the enrollment office, it's not uncommon for an admission director, enrollment director to work 3-4 years and then move to the next position, right? That's just that's just life. It's less normal for somebody to be sitting in a seat for 15 years. And I think one of the benefits of you being there for 15 years is that you have had time to do that diversification. For schools that are a little more transient, at least in that office, like how could they approach this? Like, what are some of the things that they should be thinking about? Because I agree, I think diversification is incredibly important. But if you're not blessed with like long tenures, what are some things that they can do?
Well, I don't know. You know more about this than me, Peter, but I remember when I first started out, a lot of the admissions people in the United States came from a business background. Whereas in Canada, they were educators. So I think there was a tendency for them to want to stick around longer with the school that they're passionate about rather than kind of shift. So I don't see a lot of shifting in Canadian schools. Maybe that's changed. I don't know. And I think in terms of a new person coming in and understanding how to create diversity, I've spent a lot of time creating a whole list of policies, procedures. Like basically anybody can jump into my desk everything from how I write a letter to how I open a market to everything is there. It's files upon files upon files, all a Google Drive, changed every year, monitored. It was part of the things I do when I'm on the road too. So I think the direction is there if they want to take it that way, and the tools to get there are there. It's just, again, it's the personality. Are you driven that way?
Yeah.
Are you wired?
But I love what you just said, because this is something that I'm very passionate about is, what are those standard operating procedures? And, a lot of those standing operating procedures are in our heads, right? Like we do them every day. We just kind of know them cold, but are they documented in case you take a new job or you move somewhere else or whatever the conditions may be? I think that's like Clayton, I think that's a really important message to drive home, because I don't know how like conditioned we are to document those things.
Yeah, and they're great reminders for me, and I've had a few different support staff that have come and gone, and it's great for them to sit down and just read all this stuff. Yeah, it's really, really helpful. I would recommend it to anybody. I talk about it in my book, and I outline how we did it and how we have the subfolders. So, and I'm happy to chat with anybody who wants to learn more.
All right. A couple more questions as we wrap here. So if you're, if you're a boarding school or maybe even a day school that recruits internationally and are thinking about like, how do we, go about this process if we're facing some challenges? I mean, you've grown your boarding program, one of the largest in North America. I guess what I'm trying to get to is like, what advice would you give to a new admission director facing a challenging market?
Well, that's the purpose of this book. It's all those little snippets that you could try. It's not for every school. I think you have to find your own way. You have to first of all, find your differentiators. Sing them from the mountaintop. Get everybody on your team and your school to understand what those are, to be able to articulate them. You wouldn't believe the amount of opportunities that have come my way just by me being able to quickly and efficiently talk about what makes us different than any other boarding school in the world. And you get them at that, right?
Yeah. I mean, you need to have your elevator pitch down. You have to be tight. And then you, like you said, you have to know your differentiators. I think that's really important. Okay. So on the flip side, if you're speaking to a head of school and they're saying, they call you up and say, hey, Clayton, what's the best way that I can support my team, my admission team and their strategy? Like what guidance would you, I mean, you talked a little bit about it earlier, but let's revisit it. I'm curious what you would say.
Stay out of the way and trust them. Learn as much as you can. In my book, I say, unless you've worked in admissions, even if you're head of school or whatever, you have no idea what it's like to be an admissions person. The 365-day, 24-hour-day kind of on your shoulders, you are responsible for employing everybody at your school. You understand how the markets are shifting. You understand the nuances at play. You understand how to be in different countries and what they want to hear. The advice that you're trying to give your admissions team may not be that relevant. Learn as much as you can. Spend some time in admissions. Do some tours. Get on the road. Interview people. Get them really understand what it's like to live in those shoes, because, boy, they are working hard. My colleagues around the world are crazy hard workers. Amazing. And they're amazing people to learn from.
Yeah, empathy, right? It's like empathy and walk in their shoes. Clayton, this is not an uncommon conversation that I've had over the years, but, talking to enrollment folks, and I'm thinking of a few in particular, to be honest with you, and just like the stress that you hear in their voices because of all the things you just said. Every year, they're responsible for the largest chunk of operating revenue to fund operating at the school, and the pressure that comes with that. I think building that shared empathy is really, really important. So I appreciate you talking about that in your book. Yeah. All right, my friend. So last, and most important question: if somebody wants to grab a copy of your book, where can they do that?
Amazon or Kindle.
Amazon or Kindle. Perfect.
Dare to be different. It's available. Just order it. And it's $5 million a copy. It's perfect. Easy.
All you need to do is sell one. I will most certainly put a link to the book in the show notes and make sure that, people have easy access to it. But Clayton, thanks again for sharing. Thank you for taking the time to write this book. I think I don't want to say that I represent the industry, but I certainly am sure there are a lot of people that appreciate the effort you put into this.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to see you again.
Good to see you too, my friend.
Okay. Bye-bye.